Hey guys, this is Kyle Studios here, and welcome back to another video. In today's video, we will be going through Great Adventure Controversial Opinions number 3. If you haven't seen any editions of this series yet, essentially I put out a post on whether it's Instagram or YouTube and get people's most controversial opinions about Six Flags Great Adventure, whether it's the park itself, the coasters, the rides, and I compile the most controversial ones into this video and go through what I think of the controversial opinions. Now, of course, everyone is entitled to their own opinion. This is simply my takes on these controversial opinions. But without further ado, let's get started with the first one. Great Adventure over Six Flags Magic Mountain. Now, this has been the debate for a very long time, and I'm still meaning to make a video on what I think fully on the comparison between the two parks. But I don't think this is super controversial. I mean, at least among Great Adventure home park people, most people that go to Great Adventure on the regular tend to prefer Great Adventure over Magic Mountain, but people that maybe don't go to either park that often and have visited both, a lot of people will side with Magic Mountain. Personally, I can definitely see a case being made for either or. Magic Mountain has a lot of operational issues that are definitely not as prevalent at Great Adventure, but Magic Mountain definitely does have the stronger coaster collection, but it does lose points in other categories when compared to Great Adventure. So for me to share my full opinion on this, I really need to make a whole separate video, so stay tuned for that to come eventually, but this is definitely one that I could understand from a certain perspective. Next up, El Toro should be taken down and RMC'd. I strongly disagree with this opinion. Is El Toro the best coaster Great Adventure? In my opinion, yes. So what can be done to make it better? Because there's always room for improvement on anything. In my opinion, all it really needs is a retrack and to run a little bit faster like the way it did when it first opened, and it's pretty much perfect. I mean, you have that weird middle section where it doesn't really do much, and I think that's the only place it could really benefit from being messed with by RMC. But in my opinion, if RMC were to come in and renovate El Toro and change the layout, it would just ruin the ride. El Toro has super long trains, some of the best airtime moments ever, and any alterations made to that would probably mess up the ride, so I strongly disagree with this. El Toro, in my opinion, should never be RMC'd unless that is the absolute last option they have. Next up, Nitro is overrated. Now, this is something that tends to pop up quite a bit, and I can definitely see a case being made for it depending on the day you ride. Nitro is one of the most temperamental coasters I have ever ridden. If you ride it on its good day, it can be really, really good. One of the best coasters at the park. When you ride it on a bad day, definitely not as much. It really comes down to how strong the airtime is hitting. Throughout 2023, it was running really well. Even in the colder days, it would still hit pretty hard. But you do have those days where it runs really sluggish, the trim brakes still hit, and you really don't get much airtime. So I could see where you're coming from if you experience it on one of those days, but if you experience it in its prime when it's a warmer day out, it's been running for a little bit, it's definitely a great ride. Moving on, Superman over Batman. Now, if we're talking either ride or comic books, I will still disagree with this no matter what. Batman as a character is far better than Superman, and Batman the ride is so much better than Superman Ultimate Flight, at least the Great Adventure coasters. Superman, if you know me, you know I'm really not a big fan of this attraction. I have ridden other flying coasters similar to Superman, and they're just so much better. They can do a lot more with the idea of a flying coaster, and Superman, in my opinion, does the bare minimum. You have the pretzel loop, which is by far the best part of the ride, and from there, all it does is just a bunch of meandering turns and a cool little twist at the end. Having ridden rides like Tatsu and Manta, I can definitely see how much better this ride could have been. And compare that to Batman the Ride, which is also a cloned model, but it is one of the best cloned models out there. It's super intense, super whippy, never has a dull moment. So it is, in my opinion, no comparison between the two of these. Batman destroys Superman, both in terms of comic books and rides, at least a Great Adventure, but that's just my opinion. Next up, outside of the top 3, Great Adventure's coaster lineup is not good. The top 3 in this case being Nitro, El Toro, and Kingda Ka. Not in that order, of course. So this is definitely something I could understand from a certain perspective. They say that there's too many clones at the park and that the park doesn't really have that big of an identity in terms of its coaster collection, which, yes, it's true. Almost all the coasters at Great Adventure are clones, with the exceptions of El Toro, Kingda Ka, Nitro, and Green Lantern. Medusa has been mirror imaged at Magic Mountain. Jersey Devil has been basically cloned at Magic Mountain. Batman's a clone, Superman's a clone, Joker's a clone, Dark Knight's a clone, etc., etc. And of course, Runaway Mine Train is an original coaster, just like Skull Mountain. But I do think that even with all the clones in Great Adventures lineup, I still think it has a really unique identity with the way it handles those clones. They're spaced out well enough, and each of them are one of the better variants of the clones. And I do think that the fact that the best rides at the park aren't clones definitely helps the lineup greatly. If the best coasters at the park were just clones, I definitely think it would take a few hits off the park, but because Kingda Ka, El Toro, Nitro have not been cloned, I think that definitely keeps the park having a really good coaster lineup. Next up, Nitro's color scheme is good and should not be changed. Now, this isn't saying that the ride shouldn't be repainted, but that if it is repainted, the color scheme should be kept. Now, Nitro definitely could have a really good color scheme with the colors it has, in my opinion at least. If they just got rid of that magenta or pink that's on the track, I think it looks pretty ugly. But in terms of blue and yellow, I definitely think it could look good. But now that it's faded over the past 20 or so years and it's starting to get chalky, and plus that pink magenta, I definitely think they should just switch up the colors. I do agree that the yellow and blue isn't a horrible combo, but there's so many other better color combos that I think the current scheme just really isn't doing it, and they should definitely switch it up for next year or the year after, whenever they get around to painting it. Next up, Skull Mountain should be torn down. Now, this is a pretty bold take here. As you know, I'm not a huge fan of Skull Mountain in its current state. I think back when I first rode it as a kid and I grew up with it, it was a much better ride. All the effects were still there. It was actually completely dark in there. There was sound, there was lighting effects, and if you go on it now, there's pretty much none of that, which I think is a shame because the ride really has become a shell of its former self. The queue line and station are really well themed, one of the better themed queue lines at Great Adventure, but from what I understand, if the ride were to get major work done to it to make it better inside, they probably would be better off just tearing it down and building something new. That structure is really old. It's been around since 1996, so I imagine some major work would need to be done to it. So is Skull Mountain better off being torn down? I don't know if I would say that for sure. It's still an enjoyable ride in its current state, but I definitely think there's small tweaks they could do to make the ride experience better without necessarily having to do a ton of work to it, and I really hope to see those in the near future. But I think long term, Skull Mountain probably won't last that much longer. I'd say within 10 to 20 years, it probably will be taken down, so this is definitely something I could understand. Next up, Zumanjaro over Kingda Ka. This is one of the most controversial takes I've seen here. Kingda Ka, while it's not everyone's favorite coaster, it is definitely beloved by the Great Adventure fanbase. Zumanjaro is a ride that you either really like or think is just okay. I happen to really like it. It's one of my favorite drop towers, but even my favorite drop tower pales in comparison to Kingda Ka, especially the way it was running in 2023 where it was consistently flying over the top hat. Kingda Ka, even though it's a one-trick pony, is one of the best coasters out there because that trick it does is so good. That speed from the launch, the airtime over the top hat. Zumanjaro gives one of the best views of any ride out there. You can see Philadelphia on a clear day, and getting a duel with Kingda Ka is one of the most unique experiences out there. But I do understand that the drop isn't the most forceful thing out there, especially compared to other drop towers that exist, so I could definitely see where you're coming from if you're not a huge fan of Kingda Ka, but I still think it's a pretty bold take to put a drop tower over Kingda Ka. But I personally disagree, though I could definitely see where you're coming from. And finally, El Toro's layout isn't cohesive. So essentially what this is saying is that El Toro's layout doesn't really have a good flow to it, and it's kind of mishmash, not really great. I definitely disagree with this. I do agree, though, that the middle section of El Toro isn't the best in terms of layout. I think the whole first sequence from the drop to the end of the turnaround is absolutely spectacular. Those airtime moments are great. The turnaround provides really strong positive G-forces. And then after that, you do have a bit of a lull, I won't lie. But I do think that lull kind of acts as a really good middle part for the ride, as it gives you a second to catch your breath while still giving you some cool floater moments and some head choppers. And then of course you lead up into the Rolling Thunder Hill finale with all the twists and turns. Now believe me, I know that some of those final little S-hills really aren't the greatest elements out there, but I do think El Toro has a really diverse layout that doesn't just focus on the ejector airtime. It has strong positive G-forces and some lateral G-forces, so I think overall El Toro's layout is definitely one of the most diverse out there, and it has a really good flow to it. So personally, I disagree that it's not cohesive, though I could see where you're coming from, since each half of the ride, or I guess each third of the ride, because there's definitely 3 distinct thirds of the ride, they're definitely not the most consistent. They focus on different aspects of a coaster, but I think that's what makes El Toro so good. And with that being said, that concludes controversial Six Flags Great Adventure Opinions number 3. If you guys have any controversial takes on the park or its rides that haven't been mentioned in the series before, leave them down below for a chance to be featured in the next one. If you guys enjoyed this video, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and stay tuned for more Six Flags Great Adventure content coming soon to Hollywood Studios. Goodbye, guys.